Red Hollow was the kind of place that didn't make it onto maps. It lay 3 miles past the last rusted railway marker, where the land flattened into sun-bleached bones and wind whistled secrets through the canyons. The ranch sat crooked on the earth like a forgotten memory, fence posts half-rotted, shutters loose, the paint long since baked off by summers too cruel to be kind. But the place endured, and so did she. Miriam Delaney moved with the quiet precision of someone who had stopped waiting for applause a long time ago. At dawn, she milked the goats and gathered eggs with a willow basket. By noon, she mended harnesses in the barn's cool shadow. At dusk, she walked the ridgeline alone, her eyes on the horizon like she was listening for something only she could hear. Her dress was always the same, faded blue calico stained with sweat and saddle grease, the hem dusty from dragging across the dirt. Folks in town called her the rancher's wife, said it with a mix of admiration and pity, the way people do when someone lives quietly enough to be forgotten. Her husband, Jim Delaney, had hands like knotted rope and a voice low as a church bell. He didn't say much, and when he did, it came out slow and steady, like molasses. He'd built Red Hollow from scratch, before the war took his brothers and the droughts took his faith. Now he spent most days tending to cattle that barely numbered a dozen, working the land with a kind of stubbornness only time could breed. He loved Miriam in the way men like him often did, silently, protectively, from a distance too far for comfort, but not for care. No one had ever seen Miriam smile wide or laugh loud, but if you looked closely, and most didn't, you might catch her eyes softening when a hawk cried overhead, or when the sky broke open with thunder that never brought rain. She had a gentleness that didn't ask to be noticed, and so it wasn't. In a town like Silver Rock, loud was remembered. Quiet was passed over like the breeze. That summer, the heat settled early. Crops failed quicker than usual, and whispers of trouble rode the wind like pollen. At the general store, men leaned against barrels and spat tobacco into the dust while murmuring about the Hamlin gang, train robbers, saddle thieves, killers. Word was they'd struck a Union Pacific line, just east of Pecos, shot 2 Pinkertons, and disappeared west. The law gave chase. The desert swallowed everyone. Miriam heard the talk, nodded politely, bought salt and beans, then mounted her mule and rode home without a word. But that evening, she oiled the hinges on the rifle cabinet and took inventory with a practiced eye. 3 boxes of .45 rounds, a sawed-off double barrel under the floorboard. Nothing changed in her face, but the air around her tightened, like a rope pulled just enough to hold. The days passed. The dust came heavier. Even the coyotes grew quiet. Then came the blood on the porch. She found it in the early light, just a smear across the boards, like someone had leaned hard against the post. A trail of red led to the barn. She didn't call for Jim. She didn't scream. Instead, she stepped inside, shotgun steady in her hands. A man lay slumped in the corner beneath the hayloft, his shirt dark with sweat and blood, one leg twisted wrong. His revolver had fallen near the feed bin, out of reach. He looked up when she entered, eyes sharp despite the fever. "I'm not here to rob you," he rasped, voice hoarse like gravel under boot. "I just needed to stop the bleeding." Miriam didn't lower the gun. She studied him, then the wound. A bullet had grazed his ribs. The bleeding had slowed, but his face was pale and drawn. He wasn't older than 30, unshaven and gaunt, but his features still held the kind of reckless charm that lingered even under grime and pain. "Name," she said flatly. "Elijah Roan," he said. "Most just call me Eli." She said nothing. After a moment, she set the shotgun against the wall, fetched clean water, and returned with linen from an old flour sack. Her hands moved without hesitation. She washed the wound, wrapped it tight, and never once looked him in the eyes. "You gonna turn me in?" he asked, watching her with something unreadable. "If I was," she said, "you'd be tied to the mule and already halfway to the sheriff." "You know who I am?" he asked. "I know enough," she said. "You're running. That's plain." He shifted, wincing. "You're not afraid?" "I've lived through worse things than a bleeding man." That silenced him. She let him stay in the loft. Gave no explanations, no warmth, just simple acts of necessity. Food, bandages, water. That was it. She never asked what he ran from. He never offered. But he watched her. Watched the way she moved, like every step had purpose. Not a flicker of vanity. Not a single moment wasted. She never raised her voice. Never asked for help. It unnerved him more than bullets ever had. On the third night, he tried to sit at the table. She let him. They ate in silence, until he finally spoke. "You ain't like the women I've known." She looked at him then, the lamplight catching just enough gold in her hair to remind him of something gentle, something he thought long dead. "You ain't the first man to say that," she said, then went back to her stew. Outside, the wind picked up again, the sound of it like distant hooves on stone. And far off, beyond the hills, 5 riders followed the trail Eli thought he'd erased. They were 3 days behind, maybe less. But Miriam already knew. She'd seen the buzzard circling. Eli Roan hadn't intended to stop. The plan had been simple. Ride west until the desert swallowed him whole, then disappear like dust on the wind. He'd counted on the emptiness, on the wilderness to hide him, not knowing it held something far more unsettling than pursuit silence. Silence and her. He spent 3 days in the barn before the fever broke. Miriam said little during that time, only offered broth in a chipped tin bowl, cleaned a wound with whiskey and willow bark. When he flinched, she didn't blink. She had the hands of someone who had mended more than cloth, and eyes like the edge of a storm, calm, gray, waiting. By the 4th morning, Eli limped out into the light. The ranch sprawled before him, unguarded and open, like it had nothing to fear. He stood on the porch, one arm pressed to his bandaged side, watching the way Miriam moved across the paddock. She was mending a broken gate with a hammer and scrap wood, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair tied in a thick braid that hung down her back like a black ribbon in mourning. "You could have left me for the coyotes," he said. "I thought about it," she answered without looking up. He half smiled. "Most would have." "I'm not most," she said, and that was the end of it. Eli spent the next 2 days, doing what little he could, fetching water, stacking feed, holding the fence posts steady while she hammered. He worked with the deliberate guilt of a man trying to earn his keep in a place he had no right to stay. Every now and then, he'd catch her looking at him, not with fear or pity, but with the kind of measured curiosity a hawk might show a snake it wasn't quite ready to strike. He tried to read her, but she gave nothing away. Her voice stayed even, her movements sure. But the more time he spent near her, the more he sensed something knotted deep beneath the calm. Not fear, not anger, something older. "You got no children," he said one evening, as they sat on the porch with plates of beans cooling in their laps. "No," she replied. "Ever want any?" She took a bite, chewed slowly. "Not in this world." He nodded, unsure what to make of that. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the land in gold. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried once, then fell silent. He leaned forward, voice low. "You don't ask much." "I ask what I want to know," she said. "Then I guess you don't want to know why I'm running." "I already do," she said. "You're tired." That landed harder than a bullet. Eli looked away. He hadn't always been tired. Once, he'd ridden with a gang of men who laughed louder than gunfire and lived by the rules they wrote themselves. The Hanlon gang had robbed payroll coaches, derailed trains, and once even emptied a fort's armory during a thunderstorm. But each job took more blood than the last. And somewhere between the 3rd man he watched die and the 6th he helped bury, Eli started wondering if maybe survival wasn't the same as living. Then came Pecos, a train job meant to be clean. No one dies, just scare the guards, take the strongbox. But something went wrong. A boy, couldn't have been more than 16, raised a pistol. Eli shouted. Hanlon shot. So did 3 others. By the time it was over, the cars were slick with blood, and the desert was full of smoke. Eli rode hard, didn't stop, didn't look back, until he bled out on Miriam's porch. Now, each night, he stared at the horizon. He knew they were coming. Hanlon didn't take betrayal lightly, especially not when it came with gold gone missing. One evening, as cicadas buzzed and the mule dozed under the eaves, Miriam spoke. "You dream loud." Eli rubbed his eyes. "Been that way since Dodge." She was quiet a moment. Then, You cry out a name. Isaac. Eli froze. My brother, he said finally. Joined us for one job. Just one. I said I'd keep him safe. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Miriam nodded. Pain makes ghosts of us all. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something raw beneath her quiet. Not weakness, grief. She carried her sorrow like a sidearm, unseen but always within reach. That night, the sky split with distant thunder, and Eli didn't sleep. The next morning, he found her oiling the rifle on the porch. The way she held it made his stomach twist. Not awkwardly, not like someone learning, like someone remembering. You expecting someone? He asked. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, Tracks came through the South Wash. 5 horses. Fresh. Eli cursed. They found me. I figured, she said, standing slowly. They'll be here by dusk. I'll ride out. Lead them away. They'll catch you. Better me than this place. Miriam looked at him then, steady and unblinking. This place can take care of itself, she said. Eli opened his mouth to argue, but she was already walking toward the barn. He watched her go, feeling something shift under his ribs. She'd known all along. About him, about the gang, about the storm riding in, and she hadn't turned him in, hadn't flinched. Not once. By sundown, 5 shadows would cross into Red Hollow. And for the first time in his life, Eli Roan wasn't sure which side of the line he stood on. But he knew one thing. He'd ride with her. By dusk, the sky had gone bruised with thunderclouds, but no rain came. Just wind. Hot, dry, coiling through the canyon like a warning. Eli stood beneath the barn's overhang, his revolver strapped tight to his thigh, sweat streaking through the grime on his face. Beside him, Miriam checked the sights on her rifle, hand steady, jaw clenched. They'll come from the east, she said. Cattle trail curves there. Good cover. You sound sure, Eli said. I used to hunt wolves that came for our goats. They take the same paths every time. Men like Hanlon ain't much different. Eli studied her, saw the way her fingers wrapped the stock like it was part of her. The silence between them wasn't hollow anymore. It was something built, earned. Still, he needed to ask, why help me? Her eyes stayed on the ridge. Because I've buried enough good men who were too late to walk away. Then she nodded toward the porch. You wait there. I've got something to fetch. He watched her vanish into the house. When she returned, she carried a worn leather case, long and narrow. She opened it with care, revealing a Spencer repeating rifle, older but well-kept, the kind soldiers carried in the war. Eli whistled low. That's cavalry issue. My brothers, she said, brought it back from Cold Harbor. He was 20 when they handed him a medal and a wooden leg. He gave me the rifle when he couldn't shoot anymore. She looked up, face unreadable. He said I had better aim. They moved fast after that, setting traps where the ground narrowed between rocks, pulling the wagon across the front gate to block a straight ride in. Miriam sprinkled broken glass across the hard-packed earth, glinting faintly under the moonlight. She knew this land like the back of her scarred hands, where shadows fell, where echo traveled, where blood soaked in quiet. Night fell. The wind died. And then they came. 5 riders, shadows on horseback, drifting into the clearing like ghosts wearing spurs. No talk, no signals, just a slow advance, confident. Eli stepped forward, gun at his side. Hanlon, he called. I left the gold back on the Pecos line. You want it, I'll take you there. The leader dismounted. Broad shoulders, dark coat, face like carved stone beneath a brim pulled low. Hanlon. He was older than Eli remembered, gray streaking his beard, but nothing dulled in the eyes. Those eyes had watched men burn and never blinked. You've got nerve, Hanlon said, voice like dry gravel. We buried Isaac ourselves, Eli. You don't get to vanish after that. Eli's grip tightened on his pistol. I buried enough of your mistakes. I'm done. You're done, Hanlon echoed, turning to the others. A low laugh followed. That right there, Mercy talking. You always had it in you. Always thought that made you soft. From the loft, Miriam's rifle cracked once, sharp and clean. One of the outlaws jerked backward, hit through the shoulder. tumbling from his horse in a heap. The others scattered, ducking low, drawing steel. Eli dropped behind the porch rail, returned fire. The clearing exploded into chaos, hooves thundering, bullets whining off the wagon, dry timber splintering. Hanlon took cover behind the water trough, barking orders, trying to find the shooter in the dark. But Miriam had vanished from aloft. She was already moving, slipping between shadows like smoke. She reloaded as she ran, climbed a ridge behind the barn, took aim again. Eli heard another shot. A second outlaw screamed. In the flickering lantern light, Hanlon's face shifted. This wasn't a rancher's wife picking off coyotes. This was something else. Something trained. Miriam called out from the rocks. "Walk away, Hanlon. You've got two still breathing. That's more than I expected." He laughed bitterly. "You a bounty hunter? A sheriff's widow?" "No," she said. "Just tired of watching graves get filled with good men who trusted the wrong ones." Then she stepped into the open, rifle raised, silhouette sharp against the moon. Hanlon didn't hesitate. He fired. She dropped flat, rolled, came up kneeling. One shot. Hanlon grunted, stumbled, clutched his side. Eli was already moving, crossing the clearing, his revolver aimed steady. The last rider tried to flee. His horse reared, panicked by the noise. Eli fired once. The man went down. And just like that, the fight ended. The night, broken and burning, settled again. Miriam approached Hanlon where he knelt, bleeding into the dirt. Eli stood beside her, gun still drawn. Hanlon coughed, glared up. "You don't look like no killer." She stared down at him. "I'm not, but I've lived among them." Eli stepped forward. "We turn him in. Let the law do what it should have done years ago." Miriam didn't speak, just nodded. They bound his wounds, tied him to a saddle, and dragged the survivors behind the wagon until dawn. When the sun rose, it cast long shadows across Red Hollow, over the bullet-pocked barn, the broken porch, the blood still soaking into dry ground. Eli stood at the gate, silent. "You could leave now," Miriam said. "They're finished." He looked at her. "So are you," he said. "Ain't you?" Her eyes, at last, softened. Just a little. "No," she said. "I've still got ghosts to bury." He didn't ask what that meant, because he understood. The wind picked up again, tugging at the blood-soaked dirt, carrying it westward. Eli watched it blow across the canyon and wondered if redemption ever came gently. The lawmen from Abilene came 4 days later, riding hard and quiet, their dust trailing like a funeral train. They didn't ask many questions when they saw the prisoners and the blood-dark ground. Just took Hanlon and the other surviving rider, muttered something about bounties and courts, and left a heavy sack of coin on Miriam's table without waiting for thanks. She didn't touch it for a day. Eli stayed. He wasn't sure when the decision had happened, maybe sometime between the first bullet and the last heartbeat. But he no longer looked to the horizon. He'd found something in Red Hollow that didn't exist out there, something that asked nothing and still gave him breath. It was not forgiveness. It was not love. Not yet. But it was space to become something other than a shadow of his sins. They didn't talk about the fight much, or the dead. Miriam buried the 2 men behind the barn and placed no markers, only smoothed the soil flat and whispered over it one night when she thought Eli was asleep. He wasn't. He watched her from the porch, listened to the cadence of her voice, and felt something inside him settle. The ranch slowly returned to its rhythm. The mule needed shoeing. A fence line sagged near the east pasture. The hens had gone broody and mean. Eli worked beside her now, not as a stranger, not as a man hiding, but as someone trying to build rather than escape. One evening, he found her near the creek, kneeling in the shallows with her boots off, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The light slanted through cottonwoods, turning the water to gold. He didn't speak, just watched, unsure how to name what he felt. Not desire, though that was there. Not even admiration. It was awe. She looked up. "You gonna stand there or join me?" He sat beside her, boots dangling in the current. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was full. A language without words. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about Isaac." She turned slightly, listening. "I spent a long time blaming myself, for getting him involved, for not stopping Hanlon, But lately I wonder if maybe the only thing worse than living with it is running from it. Miriam nodded. You'll always carry it, but that doesn't mean it has to bury you. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, his voice didn't shake. I want to stay. She didn't smile, not fully, but her eyes softened, and she reached down to splash him lightly with the creek water. Then stop asking permission, she said. They walked back together, boots squishing, sun on their backs. That night, he brought out his old revolver, laid it on the table, and looked at it for a long time. I can't keep this, he said. Miriam didn't argue, just pushed a tin box across to him. He opened it. Inside was a small carving knife, the kind used for wood or leather. Its edge was clean, well kept. She said, start carving fence posts. Or spoons. Something. Eli laughed a low, surprised sound. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Spring slid quietly into summer. The air warmed, and green crept back into the hills. Eli built a new corral. Miriam traded eggs and cheese at the town outpost for nails and sugar. At night, they played cards. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. One evening, as thunder rolled low in the distance, Miriam sat mending a saddle strap, while Eli peeled curls from a block of cedar, shaping it slow and careful. I never did ask, he said. Your husband, was he buried here? Miriam's needle paused. Then she resumed, smooth and precise. No, she said. He left one morning for supplies. Took the wagon. Never came back. Outlaws. No, she said. Another woman. North of Dodge. Eli blinked. Oh. She tied off the thread, looked up. I'm not grieving, Eli. Not anymore. I stayed because this land is mine. Not his. Not anyone else's. I bled for it. Built it. I'm not just the rancher's wife. I never was. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I see that now. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves danced across the yard. She reached over and turned the spoon he was carving in his hands, smoothing the edge. You're not just a man on the run, she said. Not anymore. There was no kiss, no grand declaration, just a fire crackling low, the scent of cedar and dust, and two people sitting in the quiet of their choosing. In the stillness, he understood what had drawn him to her all along. Not her face, though it was striking. Not her past, though it was carved with pain. It was her silence, a silence that wasn't empty, but full of strength, of stories untold and unbending grace. And in that silence, Eli Rohn found what he'd been chasing across 1,000 miles of desert. Peace. Not in a church, not in a noose or a bottle, but here, with her.